Welcome back. Hopefully, you've had the chance to recharge, check emails, walk the dog, check in on the kids, anything you need to do before we proceed. We will kick off the afternoon with our Ignite Talks. These are all 5 minutes apiece and cover a wide range of topics from how to make tech inclusive for our customers and workforce, how to know when to build from scratch or not, what things can we learn about DevOps from the office. Also, a series of serverless power-ups and some development pipeline health tips and tricks. Say that really fast. Then we will shift left and learn what the right way is to secure your apps from Nimish Bernard, followed by a deep dive on Agile 2 with Lisa Coney. Then we'll move on to open spaces and some more keynotes. Wait, Jeff, what is open spaces?
Glad you asked, Holly. Open spaces are one of the signature parts of the Devops Days event, and we're having them too. We're just doing them virtually. For those who might not be familiar with what open spaces are, these are sessions for you to find and interact with other attendees who share similar interests. And they are live, they're not recorded. And you might be thinking, yeah, I might bail out on those. Well, don't. Many attendees from past Devops Days events say this is where they learn the most and had the most valuable interactions, which is totally consistent with the open spaces rallying cry, prepare to be surprised. Since we're virtual, open spaces will be a little different than what we're used to when we have a Devops Days event in person. Instead of pitching ideas and doing voting in real time, we've seeded some topics for the open spaces intended to get people with similar interests into the same place at the same time, while being broad enough to allow lots of room for conversation. Now, we'll be starting the open spaces at the end of the first afternoon break, which runs from 2 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be using Hopin's sessions to host the open spaces. You can get to them using the sessions item in the sidebar on the left during the open spaces time. We'll have 2 time slots for open spaces, each 45 minutes long. One will start at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time and the other at 3:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Just find a topic that looks interesting to you and jump in. We're confident you'll learn a ton. Now, for those of you who have been to other conferences and events, you might be familiar with the law of mobility. The law of mobility says this: if you find yourself in a place where you're neither learning nor contributing, then you should respectfully navigate to find a place where you can. We're confident you'll have a super experience in the open spaces, so definitely check them out. And then stick around for a couple of killer talks to close out the day. One from John Willis, otherwise known as Bachigaloop, and a co-author of the DevOps Handbook, and Frank Reno, who will be talking about open telemetry.
Last but not least, right after we close, we will roll right into our networking event that's hosted by Glenn Wilson, the CTO of Dynaminate. The link to access the event is in our reception area, and we will be using a platform called Toucan. It only takes an email address and a few seconds to register so that you can connect with each other and some of our speakers live. That's it. Let's hear some more talks.
Hello, my name is Claire Labrie, and I am a release engineer at HashiCorp. I want you to put your imagination caps on. Imagine a mother sitting in the doctor's office with a baby in her lap. The baby is watching the doctor's movements with unusual intensity while the doctor is performing a hearing test. The baby passes with flying colors, and the doctor says the hearing is just perfect. Well, that baby was me, and that doctor was wrong. I am deaf, and I was born that way. You see, never having had a sense of hearing gave me the gift of being extra sensitive to touch, to movement, and a heightened spatial awareness. I was sitting on my mother's lap. Although she didn't realize it, she was moving ever so slightly in the directions of the doctor and the sound. I would then follow her. My mother was my ears. It was not until I was put to sleep for the auditory brainstem response test that I failed the hearing test with flying colors. Before I get started, this talk focuses on sensory disabilities through a deaf lens. People with disabilities consist of a huge universe, and I'm only scratching the surface. With that, imagine if you had lost some sort of sense. You went to a really loud concert, sat over by the speakers, and for the next few weeks, you were hearing muffled. It's time to go to work, and you have to participate in a meeting. You're lost. You don't understand why the presenter is talking about implementing a new CI/CD pipeline. What is the goal of the implementation? You miss why all of this is important. Then you see your team talking with one another, throwing out ideas and ways to approach this project. You instantly try to engage with them and ask them to repeat themselves. They become frustrated because you're slowing them down. And you realize you are utterly lost. Now ask yourself, what would you do to alleviate the problem? Perhaps you can ask your team to talk one at a time, ask someone to take notes for you. These strategies are called accommodations. My interpreter is an accommodation. She's my ears and my voice. Accommodations are designed to help people with disabilities have the same opportunities as able-bodied persons. Would your workplace provide accommodations if you asked? That's fantastic. That shows your workplace views people with disabilities as equals. It's unfortunate reality, though, that many workplaces do not feel the same way. They're often spooked by the cost that they have to pay in order to provide accommodations for people with disabilities. Now let's shift the landscape a bit. Let's imagine a workplace that invests in hiring people with disabilities and providing accommodations to these employees. Those people who are hired have equal employment opportunities and are likely to keep their jobs, which benefits the company with higher retention rates, benefits performance, and ultimately more profitability. There was a study done a few years ago by Accenture, which found that companies that championed people with disabilities actually outperformed other companies. And this allowed their revenues to increase by 28% higher, and their net income was 200% higher. There were other findings as well. That excerpt shows that isn't to say that hiring people with disabilities is better than hiring able-bodied people. Rather, it shows that providing people with disabilities equal opportunities and access levels that playing field by providing them an opportunity. For me, my American Sign Language interpreter is what makes me successful. They relay information to me in ways that I can understand. As a result, I feel able to focus on my career without worrying about missed information. What can you do to make your workplace more welcoming and more safe to create spaces for people with disability to disclose? Unfortunately, many individuals do not disclose on their job applications, and this is very common because workplaces don't do enough to show applicants that they don't discriminate based on disability. Putting down the legal phrasing is not enough. Be intentional. The job application process must make the person feel safe so that they can apply regardless of disability. If you want to hire individuals with disabilities in your workplace, ask yourself some questions. What can you do to make it more inclusive? Don't stop at interpreters. Including a deaf person in a side conversation, check in on them, provide them equal opportunities for promotion, professional development. These are things that able-bodied people benefit from every day. Why not do it for people with disabilities as well? The tech world is evolving and fast. We need diversity and inclusion to make this tech world better for everyone. Think about babies in their mother's laps and those babies growing up to be software engineers 20 or 30 years later. How can we make this place an accessible and inclusive one so that they don't have to fight for the most basic human needs to be able to be happy and succeed in their life? I challenge everyone watching to go out and create an inclusive workspace and tech world for individuals with disabilities. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Banjo Obiami. I'm a developer advocate at AWS, and today I'm going to talk about scaffolding data pipelines. So what is a data pipeline? When I think of data pipeline, I think of data and then a process that's interacting with that data and putting it out in another location. We like to think of this as ETL, extract, transform, load. So it's really about encapsulating a repeatable process given an input. And the input is data, and we want to be able to do something with data, put it somewhere else, have somebody consume this, transform it. And data pipelines are really the bread and butter for a lot of these cooler applications. So can one tool really solve our data pipeline issues? There's Kubernetes, there's MinIO, there's TensorFlow, there's Jenkins, MLflow. All these tools purpose-built for a certain type of data pipeline. And the answer is no. A lot of the times, a lot of these tools are combined or tested out with different types of tools and processes to make my special unique data pipeline work for my problem. But I always ask, how can we build a data pipeline that fits each project's needs? All these tools have similar characteristics. Maybe they're extracting data, they're pointing to data, putting it somewhere else. But each data pipeline is going to fit a project differently. So I like to think of how can we scaffold an environment that allows us to build modular data pipelines. So scaffolding is really about seeing this common conventions of type of projects where source code is, binary test, but scaffolding is usually run at the beginning of a project. So in Python, there's a tool called Cookie Cutter that allows you to do project level scaffolding. Like basically, I'm starting a new GitHub repo. I can run this cookie cutter and it'll set up the project for me, so I can just begin building and instead of having to worry about boilerplate code. But the problem is that these tools only work at the beginning. So I was really looking for a tool that can work scaffold a project, module, and a pipeline as a project evolves. So I built a tool called Zephyr, which is a command line utility that provides project and component scaffolding to build modular pipelines. It's on PyPy, so you can do pip install Zephyr bootstrap. It uses cookie cutter and metaflow as a way to kind of orchestrate the entire pipeline process. So it's also very simple. There are only 3 commands: init, module, and pipeline. So by using kind of starting up the project, creating modules, and creating pipelines as the project evolves. So the first step is to use Zephyr init, which just downloads some of the basic code and then creates the project structure. So you get like a notebooks folder, a docs folder, a make file, requirements.txt, versions, all the necessary components when developing a data pipeline. You can also do a Zephyr module create. So this creates an actual module from putting your prompt. So you can say I want to extract module, I want to test module, and then it'll create the actual code for that module. Then you have the Zephyr pipeline creator. We can actually take each individual module, and then you can add different modules. So I can do the ETL module, I can do module 1, module 5, and play around with different modules. And it gives you a metaflow pipeline to just run through everything. So Zephyr's value add really about templating, having the metaflow orchestrator run your modules, and then able to swap in custom cookie cutter modules based on what kind of patterns you're seeing instead of using the default one. Zephyr does not code for you. It doesn't push things to the cloud and doesn't enforce certain workflows. So it's really about giving you the tools to build your scaffolding pipeline so you can evolve your modules and pipelines as you're building. So when starting any kind of data pipeline initiative, I always ask, are you currently using scaffolding? What are the common setup tasks that you have to do for pipelines? And how do you currently experiment with different modules? That's really going to drive how you're going to use a tool like Zephyr or building data pipelines. If you notice certain patterns that are happening a lot, certain modules you play around with, how do you experiment with different modules? So that's really what this tool is really allowing you to do. Really experiment, try different modules and play around and just build and not have to worry about how to connect the dots. Build those modular pieces and then start experimenting and trying your data pipelines. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is John Osborne. I'm a chief architect at Red Hat, focused on cloud native, but today I'll be talking about the office and what it can teach us about DevOps. So over the course of the pandemic, I started listening to a lot of podcasts, and specifically the Office Ladies podcast was just so interesting to me because they just started talking about so many things that we think about in tech as DevOps. And in that moment, I knew exactly what to do, but in a much more real sense, I had no idea what to do, which is my terrible segue into this Office Ignite talk. My 15 seconds headline for DevOps is that it's just a lot of principles and practices that focus on better collaboration between teams to get us to our goal of building a dynamic learning environment. Odds are that most of the software used every day is built using DevOps. Now, if you believe in DevOps, you fundamentally have this underlying belief that people are your best assets. Greg Daniels, founder for the American version of The Office, also had the same belief. He made it all about the people. He wanted to know everyone, he respected everyone, and he really just wanted to get their best ideas as well and build a great environment to work in. Now, historically, writers and actors are very siloed. Writers didn't trust actors to get laughs, so they'd write actor-proof jokes, throw them over the wall. They never talked, so there's lots of resentment. Sound familiar? Greg had this crazy idea to break down this big tradition of having this sacred wall between the writers and the actors. His goal was to get more laughs based around the performance and not just the jokes as written. So he blurred the lines. Actors could pitch ideas and writers could perform. There's a widespread misconception the office was largely improvised, and it wasn't. It just seems that way because the collaborative environment that he built. Now, the writers, interestingly, used a lot of idea generation tools that parallel what we do in software, but they also did a great job of building a safety culture where the best ideas could bubble up. It didn't matter if they came from assistants or craft service, they were just taking the best ideas and running with it. Now, because the writers were on set, instead of random improvs, they could go back and forth and figure out what the best idea might be. And that really gave us a lot of the best lines from the show. For instance, the line about the wine having an oaky afterbirth and Jim's look to camera that he gave afterwards. So, what was that? Or this one from Initiation, which made me laugh as well. And I just love the Rainn Wilson quote around it because he touched on something that's really important for safety culture. It's that nobody feels threatened where the idea is coming from. It doesn't matter what's supposed to be there. They're just taking the funniest. And as he later pointed out, that's not always the case. Many ideas came from the writer's own experiences. For instance, Jen Salato was reading a GPS manual that became Michael's car driving into lake. Halstead Sullivan's childhood memories looking for the African-American version of Cabbage Patch Kids became Princess Unicorn episode. Writers playing Call of Duty became a thing. But what's unique to The Office is that since actors could pitch ideas, a lot of ideas came from their experiences too. And that gave us a lot of bits and episodes that wouldn't really exist without DevOps culture because, as Larry Wilmore pointed out, it was a communal writing process. Now, Jenna was an actual receptionist and Angela worked at 1-800-DENTIST before The Office. So they pitched this woman in the workplace based around all the corporate trainings they had to do. And as Angela later wrote in her journal, a lot of shows don't let actors get involved. She wrote, "We're so lucky to be a show that really respected our ideas." The Office was also the first American comedy to depict Diwali. When Mindy Kaling pitched this episode to Greg, he said yes, but then also she had to confront the fact that she actually doesn't know much about Diwali, even though she's Indian American. And that really became a big part of the episode as well, and Mindy really loved that. A few other quick hits. Dwight being Amish came out of an ad lib. Snorkel shots from the booze cruise came from Angela's real life experience on a booze cruise. And Michael's perfect storm of procrastinating signing documents also came from Jenna's time as a receptionist. Now, once everyone trusts each other, you can really get the best results with experimentation. And The Office really threw away 5 decades of standards for comedies. The laugh track was gone, studio audiences were gone, cameras attached to big dollies also gone. Now, they went to this single camera setup and they tried to do it a lot of different things. For instance, the camera was like an actor essentially. Followed them around. They were the first to do spy shots. First show really to do these sort of really big giant pauses. First show to remove actor marks. Now in software, we talk about experimentation. We don't know if software is any good until the code's written. We get feedback. Greg followed this approach with A/B testing. He brought in a lot of people to see which versions of which were better. Like the eye doctor, this or that. And they did this episode with a proposal. They shot one without audio and one with. Now, tech was also a huge accelerator, just like in software. They were riding this digital wave. They were on MySpace. They had blogs. They really interacted with the fans, which ended up being huge for their core kind of young base. So all in all, what can the Office teach us about DevOps? Well, DevOps is about people that we know, but really the most important thing in any organization is the relationships between those people, and that's fostering those relationships is really how we get the best out of everyone. You probably thought it was weird when I picked The Office to talk about DevOps, but there was so much content, I could barely fit it all in. And ultimately, there's beauty in ordinary things. Isn't that the point? Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Sajil Yusuf, and at the time of preparing this presentation, I'm a product manager at Atlassian. And welcome to this lightning talk, where I will try to go over 5 serverless-based architectures in this limited time to build ancillary functionality, basically, to better facilitate our DevOps workflows. So getting into it, the goal of DevOps is to increase velocity while maintaining stability. We can do this by striving for the 2 pillars which I like to present as you build it, you run it, and automate everything. Basically breaking down the silos and making sure that we can facilitate this process by automating much of our development pipeline. The reason why I want to use serverless for this is because the benefits of serverless are that they are fully managed, scalable, and provide a pay-as-you-go model to build cost-effective solutions. And getting right into our first use case, which is monitoring. Here, I want to talk about more specifically synthetic monitoring. This is something we used to do in Opsgenie, where we would set up Lambda functions to constantly send user impersonating requests to the production environment and collect the response in transactional Lambdas. And you can better analyze these responses using serverless monitoring tools to overcome that black box problem of serverless. And once you overcome that black box problem, you see that the benefits of Lambda functions are that they're lightweight, easy to spin up, and cost effective. Finally, you can use anomaly detection functionality in most of these monitoring tools that exist these days to trigger alerts and consolidate these alerts in alert consolidation and on-call scheduling tools such as Opsgenie, so that you always notify your responders whenever something goes wrong. And this brings us to the remediation use case, where we can leverage Event Bridge at the core. And again, using Opsgenie and Event Bridge's integration, we can trigger remediation events into your AWS infrastructure. Thanks to Event Bridge's routing rules, depending on the trigger events from Opsgenie, respective actions can be taken. Again, this is lightweight and fully managed using the serverless event bus service, which is Event Bridge, right? And the next use case I want to talk about is continuous deployments, where we promote pull-based pipelines over conventional push-based pipelines, a concept that is now popularly being captured in the practice of GitOps in Kubernetes-based infrastructure, which aims to speed up the release process. Right? The process involves developers creating pull requests through Git VCS tools. Docker then stores these images upon the pull request. Amazon S3 pulls the images to store Helm charts, and AWS Lambda is leveraged to pull the charts and commit to the cluster repo. We can leverage operator tools such as vworks in the end, which detect changes in the cluster repo and make the appropriate changes in your respective Kubernetes clusters. By using serverless functions, we ensure cost-effective and fully managed components to facilitate the entire process. However, making automated changes is a very risky business, and that's where we should really think about pre-production testing practices, such as continuous integration load testing. Right, and again here we see the use of serverless functions. For example, in this example in the slide, Joyce Lind, the Director of Developer Relations at Postman, shows how Postman open source Newman project can be used to orchestrate several Postman collections in parallel. You can write several Postman collections to run and test and measure the SLOs. And once you establish a baseline, you can scale up or down your Lambda functions to see what the load or how your infrastructure reacts to these varying loads. And again, you can use monitoring tools such as Datadog to iterate over the feedback. Finally, I want to talk about ChatOps, which can be used in several different places throughout the deployment, development, and operation workflow. Similar to what we saw with auto remediation, Event Bridge is at the core of this architecture, and it's hooked up to several Lambda functions. And as per the events received from the chat tools such as Slack, through to Slack commands, you can perform various actions directly from the chat tool which your team is used to into your AWS infrastructure. Finally, these were the 5 basic DevOps facilitating architectures built using serverless services. But serverless is not only limited to building these ancillary functionality, it can actually be directly involved in building out your main infrastructure. And in the longer version of this talk, I speak about how serverless services can help with thinking about concepts such as active-active and cost-effective architectures. I actually speak about this with Jeremy Daly in his show, Serverless Chats. So go check that out. It must be noted though that serverless is not always cost-effective, right? So depending on your traffic, your cost can spiral. So that's one thing to keep note of. Another point is that in this presentation, I've mostly shown AWS services, but that doesn't mean you're restricted to only AWS services. And that's my time. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this. I know we didn't manage to go into much detail, but this is a lightning talk. But if you do want to go into more detail, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'm always happy to have these conversations with everybody. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to my talk about pull request size, and how it's the most important indicator of dev pipeline health. My name is Ori Keren. I'm the co-founder and CEO of LinearB. LinearB will build this product that helps developers, team leaders, and VPs of engineering improve their day-to-day work. We also build this great community called Dev Interrupted, and you can see the great lineup that we had over the last year. Leaders from the best companies talking about the metrics that are important for them. Everybody wants to talk about engineering metrics. The recurring theme is DORA. We all about the DORA metrics, and you can divide them into speed. So basically cycle time, how quickly work moves through the development pipeline, and deployment frequency, how often do we release? The other two are sort of like quality metrics, and you can find change failure rate. Basically means how often a release will fail, either cause an outage or a downgrade, and MTTR, mean time to restore. When it happens, how quickly we recover from these issues. DORA metrics, really important, but a disclaimer, DORA metrics will help you improve the dev process. They won't ensure you're aligned with the business, what the business wants you to build. And those are different KPIs and different 5-minute doc. What is pull request size? Really simple. Take the lines of code that you have in pull request that you added, you deleted, or you changed, and just sum them up. That's your pull request size right there. If you're in GitLab, you probably know it as merge request size. So that's pull request size. And we're going to talk about the impact it has on the DORA metrics, but really quickly, we can understand that pull request size will impact the review time, how much time it takes us to review code, and the review depth, basically how much coverage we had in the review. Pull requests, small pull requests will improve everything around our cycle time. First of all, it will improve our coding time, because if it's small, it means that there's not a lot of coding time. We broke it into small chunks, which is great. It will also improve the pickup time, because it's a known fact that if I have a small pull request and I'm asking my peer to review, if it's a 5-minute task, they will take the context switch and they will do it now. If it's a 30-minute task, they will put it in the queue. So it will improve the pickup time. It will also improve the overall review time, because if I have a large pull request, I have a lot of distraction time, meaning I'm going to read the code, then I'm going to take some time to recover, then I'm going to come back and say, wait, I need to remind myself what I've read. So it impacts everything. There's a research that we did in LinearB that shows that 50% of the pull requests are idle for more than half of the time. And even if you take nights and time off and weekends and all of that, they're still idle for more than half of the time. And you can see here an example of, there's two types of those idle time: transition time, where you can see a lot here, and distraction time. Both are bad. We talked about transition time, and as we can see, transition time is bad. But there's a way to improve. It still increases the cognitive load, but what's even worse is distraction time, because again, I'm going to read the same code 3 or 4 times. I'm going to read the same comments 3 or 4 times, so it's a waste. Reducing the pull request size will basically increase the review depth, and that's almost the cheapest form of quality you can ask. Because if I'm reading all of the code and I'm covering everything, I'm going to find between 70 to 90% of the bugs in advance. Now let's go back to the DORA metrics. Eventually, small pull requests will improve your change failure rate and your MTTR. Basically, you will end up with small releases that you remember everything that you wrote, so it's easier to recover, and you will fail less. You will fail, fast and less. If you want to reduce your pull request size, basically plan ahead, break the work into small chunks. But also, when you see those areas that need a refactor, we all know them. Keep them in the backlog, come back to them, but don't separate PR. They don't belong in your PR. LinearB, a little bit about us. I won't talk about business alignment, the pipeline observability. These are 2 pillars of us. The third one is where I want to focus: developer workflow optimization. And this is us on a mission to save developers between 30 minutes to 60 minutes every day. And we do so by correlating data, taking the bureaucracy, saving you, logging into Jira. We're going to close tickets and open tickets for you. We're going to estimate how much time it will take you to review, so you can plan ahead. If you have a meeting, you could take a small PR. It's amazing. And when we roll it out, what we're seeing, as we see in this case study with Illuminate, everybody's happy, because if I'm a developer, it saves me time and I can push my PRs faster. But also the leadership is happy, because cycle time is shorter and there's shorter time to value. That's it pretty much. But if you want to learn more about LinearB, there's 2 ways. One, we have an amazing event coming up called Linear Beyond. You can hear about the research I just mentioned. You can see great news about stuff that we're going to launch, and you can learn about our 2022 roadmap. The second option is this is what we believe in. That's our philosophy. You can just try the product and see if it helps you. So you can try it for free. You can register for a full-blown trial. We have all the options. And that's it. That's my short talk. Thank you very much for staying and listening.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be part of Devops DC 2021. Before I start on my topic, I would like to thank the organizers for choosing this topic. I'm so excited to share on the journey we took and in Capital One, and also the lessons we learned. And I'm happy to share the experience with you all. So the topic I chose today to talk about is shift left is the right way of securing your apps. Is it so? Let's talk through that. Before I jump onto that, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Nimesh Bernard, and I'm a director of software engineering in Capital One. And I manage one of the sides of the pipeline which Capital One uses, and we have one pipeline, and there's close to 13,000 developers who use that. And I'm going to share the story and how we did it and what journey we took in order for that to be achieved. It was a fun and exciting journey, and we had a lot of learnings as we went through that. So shifting left, is it the right way to securing the apps? So you must have this question, should I move left or right? Most of us are so consumed by the term shift left. Let me take a pause there. Before we decide on moving left or moving center or moving to the right, we have to answer some questions. Yes, shift left is a fancy term, and that's what the industry has been talking about, that we have to move shift left, move left as much as possible. That's a good thing. I'm not saying nothing wrong about that, but we have to ask some questions. Let's not be stuck with the term shift left, but focus on what we have to do. What is the right thing to do, and what is the right stage or the right place to implement some of the security aspects? Like, what do we do on that? Former UK Prime Minister David Cameron quoted this: I believe that in life, you have to give things your best shot. Do your best. You have to focus on what needs to be done. Do the right thing and not the popular thing. I just like the last line. He said, do the right thing, not the popular thing. So we are going to go through some of the aspects of what is the right thing, how do we secure our apps, and what as an industry we've been driving and what we need to do. So let's not get stuck with, should I move left or move right? Before we decide on moving left or not, we need to be clear on what are we trying to solve, right? Without that, we won't be able to decide whether I'm doing right or not. So we have to be clear on what are we trying to solve? How are we going to implement this? What are the strategies we are going to see? So when I say what are we trying to solve, am I trying to solve a cyber gap? Am I trying to solve an SDLC gap? Am I trying to solve a data gap, or a reporting, or a compliance? Or I'm trying to improve the developer experience, or I'm trying to improve the stability? There's so many things you can walk through that when we talk about shifting left. Because I mentioned development, a developer experience, that is the most critical piece, because that way the developers are not spending too much time fixing their code, but increase their time in feature development. And also it improves the stability of the system we are trying to solve. So I said, let's not be consumed by shift left or not right. Let's try to understand what we are trying to solve. Then once we decide on what we are going to solve, we have to move on to, do we have the data to decide what we are trying to solve? Before, again, let's not be consumed by the left or right. Let's not be consumed by shift left. We need data before we try to solve anything. So I talked about the cyber gaps. When you say cyber gaps, how do I know this cyber has a gap or not? Do I have the data to justify that? When I talk about the SDLC gap, did I talk to the SDLC team to understand what data do they have? What are the problems they are trying to solve? What are they trying to automate? How can you help on that? And you can say, okay, this is your need. Can we do it in the right place in the pipeline? What stage of the pipeline do you want to implement? So you need to start gathering data. And then there's a reporting, there's a compliance. All these are data you have to gather before you decide on what you're trying to solve. Because there's too many things to solve. It is not just one, two, but there's too many things you can solve. And also when you try to solve all these things, you have to keep in mind that the build time should not increase. Right? As we implement a lot of controls, we have to be very cognizant of what and how And also, am I decreasing the productivity? Am I increasing the build time? You have to look into all those things and also build failure points. If you're introducing all these controls, you're introducing more events in the stages. As you introduce all these events, there is also a possibility of failures. So the more failures you have in your pipeline, that means the developers are not happy. They're not able to push code into prod. So you have to be very careful about that. And then for making a decision, you also have to consider all these data points. Without data, we cannot make any decision. So for us to have a good pipeline, we need to know what we are trying to solve. And for us to know what we need to solve, we need to have the data to solve it. So I encourage each one of you watching this to look into the cyber data, the SDLT data, even the data engineers, talk to them and say, hey, what is that we need to do for reporting? What is that we need to do for compliance? What is that we need to do for auditing? And also looking into how can you improve the build time so that we as an organization or you as an organization are doing the right thing to the organization. Because nowadays, securing the apps is kind of becoming the #1 aspect of any organization. You don't want any data leakage. You don't want any vulnerabilities. You don't want any gaps in your system where a third party can penetrate into your network or system. So we have to build a software where we have some defensive and offensive methods of controlling all our vulnerabilities. So moving on to data, next is, what are some of the areas you can think about before solving, right? There is too many things. You can say, hey, I have too many things to solve. Now I know what I'm trying to solve. I know I have to concentrate on cyber. I need to concentrate on SDLC. I have some data. What are some of the areas you have to think and say, let's deep dive from 35,000 feet. What I mean by 35,000 feet is when you say, hey, I'm trying to solve cyber. Okay, that's good, but that's way too high. I'm trying to solve the SDLC problem. That's good, but that's way too high. You have to little bit deep dive. Let's come to 10,000 feet. The 10,000 feet is where the design is happening. You're designing and deciding, okay, this is how we are going to do it. And this is a flow of the system, how it's going to happen. So you have to ask your question, what do we think? How do we solve? So you have to be like a cyber engineer. I know a lot of the organizations may not have a dedicated cyber team or may not have a dedicated ISO team or an SDLC team or a compliance team, but that's okay. You can put yourself in their shoes. Like, if I were a cyber engineer, what will I be looking for? What are the areas I'll be looking to solve? What are the ways I'll try to block some of the code from getting into production system? Because it's too late once it goes on production system, because the time and the cost to get that rectified is huge. Because during the time, you won't be able to do any feature development. The teams will be concentrating on fixing those vulnerabilities, pushing the new code in, making sure that the old code, which has the vulnerability, has been cleaned up from the production system. So I would suggest, before you jump onto all these fancy things and start implementing, take a step back and see what I'm going to solve. What are the data I have? What if I were a cyber, what will I be thinking? If I was looking from the SDLC point of view, what I'll be looking for. If I'm looking from a compliance point of view, what I'll be looking for. If I'm looking from an ISO standpoint, information security department, what will I do for? If you're thinking about audit, sometimes audit, we think, oh, it's just internal audit. There's also external audits. We have to see what data will they be looking for from the pipeline. If I push a code from my development environment to production, you must have gone through different stages. So when they come to audit, what are some of the data they'll be looking for? So you have to brainstorm all of these things before you try to solve. So that way, you're not just talking too high, but you're coming a little bit deep. That's some of the things we in Capital One went through. Okay, we want to solve, because we in Capital One, we take security very seriously. We want to make sure that when the code is pushed to prod, we don't have any critical vulnerabilities in the code. We want to stop from those type of code going into prod. So that's what we have to do. So I suggest you have to think like the cyber. You have to think like an ISO. You have to think like the SDLC. You have to think like compliance. You have to think like audit, and then start moving towards that direction. Now, okay, we say, okay, so what are some of the areas to think about before solving? Next comes, who are your stakeholders? So I was talking more about the cyber. I was talking about audit. I was talking about ISO. I was talking about the SDLC team, the compliance team, all these different teams who will be interested in how we implement the cyber gaps or initiatives. But there is also one important group in this, that is the developer community. If we don't take the developer community along with us in this journey, it will be very difficult for us to implement any solution. It's not about they're being bad or they don't want to do it. It's just that they need to know ahead of time what is going to come. If you can create a roadmap, if you can strategize on when each of the controls is going to be implemented, or if you can let them know what stage it's going to be implemented, and if you take them along with your journey, with you in the journey, it'll be easy for you to implement, because developers are your trainees. They will be your best cheerleaders, because once they understand the need of why we are doing it, once they understand why some of the controls are being implemented, they will definitely jump in and try to solve and help you with solving most of the issues. So the other stakeholders, as I mentioned, the auditors. You may say, hey, I don't deal with auditors. We don't have auditors, but it's good to think like one. We don't have a cybersecurity, think like them. So if you have a team like that, talk to them, understand what they are trying to solve or what they want to look for. So that way, it's not just you are concentrated just on the release engine, where you say, I need to check out the code, I need to do some verification, I need to build the code, I need to deploy in different environments, and I'm pushing the code to prod. Instead of just being a very simple pipeline, you're trying to introduce some controls all along the way. If you're doing a checkout, these are some more things I'll be checking. If I'm building, I'll do certain checks. If I push your code to prod, QA, I'll be doing some checks. If I'm pushing my code to prod, I'll be doing some checks. So you have to go through those checks. You have to think through it. Again, there is a lot of community groups out there who can help. There's a lot of white papers there which you can use and see which one is the best way. How do we implement? There's tons of data. And again, we have conferences like this, the Devops conferences, where you can get a lot of information. Again, there'll be a lot of information. There are a lot of things you can solve, but think about what makes sense for your organization. Not everything will make sense. Not like even in Capricorn, we don't try to solve everything. We don't try to implement everything, because it does not. Sometimes it is not needed for us, but needed for ABC company. It may not be good for us. Maybe it's good for an XYZ company. So you have to decide for your kind of business, for your kind of security, which controls are important for you. Like in the cyber, what are the cyber controls we need? In information security, what type of security you need to have? In the auditing, what type of auditing, what level of auditing you need? So you have to go through all these things. So I talked about what are the problems we are trying to solve, who are the stakeholders, and I also talked about the data and who will be interested in that, doing a little bit deep dive. So I talked about that. Then your question may come up, what is the benefit of doing all this? Why do I have to do this? The lessons we learned in Capital One is when we implement this standards, it's mainly it is for standardization and automation of our system. That's the greatest benefit you will get from this. That means you know what you're trying to implement. You will be able to centralize the standardization of a control. It's not like you're running around different teams. Hey, you need to implement the standard, and you have to work with 50 teams, 100 teams, 200 teams based on the size of your organization. Or you can say, let me introduce the standard in one place, and every team will be implementing or be using that standard. And it is easy to automate. If you have to make a change in your pipeline, it is easy to make a change in one place, and it has been implemented across the team. So you have to think through that. So when I was looking into the standardization and automation, this story came into my mind. The Ford company, you all know Ford makes car, and initially during their initial days, I'm talking about early 1900s, they started manufacturing cars. And one of the issues they had is they took a lot of time to build a car, and the cost was really high. And because of the cost was really high, they were not able to sell more cars to the customers. So Ford, what he did is he's like, how do I reduce this cost? How do I standardize the process? So he went on some studies and he started looking into what is the best way to do this? What is the best process to do this? So he was inspired by the continuous flow production methods used by flour mills or the breweries and the canneries, which he saw in Chicago. So he said, okay, they have a good continuous flow production, and how they are able to standardize and how they're able to automate that, and say, okay, he wanted to implement the same in his factories. You see, he took a lesson from a flour mill company. He took a lesson from a brewery, and he said, I'm going to implement that in the car production line. So he implemented the continuous flow approach in the plants. So he separated the 84 steps it takes to build a car. And he said each of the steps is going to be done by one individual. That's all they have to do. Just concentrate on one thing and do it best. So he was able to implement that. So the first model they produced, which was the Ford Model T, so their cost initially, before implementing this continuous line process, it used to cost $825. But after automation, after he was able to standardize the process, the cost came down to $260, from $825 to $260. Yes, it's not much now, but during that time, it was a lot of money. So when it reduced to $260, a lot of them were able to buy it. And then the time they took to produce it, it reduced from 12 hours, more than 12 hours, to 1 hour, 33 minutes. Almost 10%, 90% of the work has been reduced. The time has been reduced. So when you introduce standardization and automation, you're decreasing the cost and you're decreasing the time for a code to go into prod. If in our language, if we have to talk about in software language, it's more of CI/CD split. What are the CI/CD split and what are the tools we want to use? If we don't do it, we have to think about what is the risk associated with this. Everybody doing different process, hard to implement any controls, hard to standardize, hard to automate, even hard to know what is going into prod. So you have to be like, okay, what I'm going to do? This is the greatest benefit is you're standardizing the process and you're automating. Like the lesson Ford learned, he implemented that in December 1, 1913. Greatest lesson, and it improved his productivity and decreased his cost. So based on standardization and automation, you're going to say, how am I going to solve this? There's a lot of problems in the organization. How am I going to do it? I will give you a good example. Don't try to solve all the problem at once. Identify areas to fix the problem. Set goals. Set realistic expectations. Set timelines. Set your priorities. When you do the prioritization, you have to see what are some of the quick wins and what are some of the long-term solutions. One step at a time is the key for this. You don't want to solve everything. You don't want to go until I'm going to solve 100 problems, rather than say, hey, I'm going to categorize quick wins and long-term solutions. And in quick wins, these are some of the first items I'm going to solve. In the long term, I'm going to solve this. And when you talk about small wins, you also talk about what are the benefits the organization is going to get. What are the numbers? Provide them numbers with, okay, if you do this much productivity time is being decreased, and you can say this much feature development time is being increasing, so that you're taking the leadership along with you in the journey, as well as you're taking the developer community along with you in the journey, one step at a time. You may say, okay, you're talking about all this cyber, ISO, and all these things. Why do I have to do it? Why do I have to solve for everything? Capital One, I'm just talking from Capital One. Capital One is a highly regulated industry. We are a financial bank, so we are regulated by these many organizations. We are across 3 countries. So there is a lot of regulation. So we have to go through all these things. And you may ask, Capital One is a financial institution. You need to go through all this cyber and ISO and audit, internal, external, and everything. But your organization may not be coming under these controls or these level of auditing or these level of compliance. But I will tell you something, it's like, even though you're not regulated, if you have to sell to, say, take for example, Capital One of your products, you have to be compliant with all these things. So you have to take a step back and say, yes, even though we don't need to go through all this checks and balances, if you want to sell to one of those industries where it is highly regulated, it is very easy for you to be recognized because you say, hey, we are already compliant with all those financial needs. We already go through all the cyber needs. We have a very secure product. It will be easy for you to sell your product. So think through that and say, okay, even though I'm not regulated, I'm going to think through that. So the next step, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, where do I start? Okay, now I'm doing all these things. Where do I start? I just want to give you one example. Is in our organization, the line of business I'm in, for this like Q4, we had just a fun event. I'll say like what's a fun event is we decided, like some of us in the line of business decided like by end of December, we want to plan for 5 minutes. Yes, 5 minutes we want to plan. So it's hard. So the way we decided is let's not just start with 5 minutes and say how long we can do. What we decided that if a meeting ends 5 minutes early or 10 minutes early, we'll use that time. Let's start with 30 seconds at a stretch. Like first week, let's do plan for 30 seconds. Second week, we'll do for 1 minute. So keep on increasing the time. So now it's been almost 4 weeks. We can easily do, some of us can easily do 2 minutes plaque at a time, but our goal is 5 minutes. So where I'm going with that is when you do a solution, when you try to solve something, don't go all out and say starts here, ends here, rather than take it slow, stages, like 30-second stages, 30-second gaps. So that way it's easy for them to understand, easy for the leadership to understand, easy for the development community to understand, and it's easy for you to implement that. With all this said, I just want to walk you through how did Capital One approach this challenge. Capital One approached this challenge because Capital One had like, I don't know the number of pipelines we had internally. There were a lot of pipelines. So we, as a first step, is like, how can we consolidate all these pipelines? So we looked into different pipelines, the capabilities, and chose just one pipeline. So, okay, this is the pipeline we are going to implement. And this is where the controls are going to be implemented. This is where you're going to start automating and standardizing. So that's the first thing we did. Then we said, okay, what are the controls we want to implement? What are the cyber controls? What are the ISO controls? What are the data controls? What are the SDLC controls? What are the compliance, audit? All these things we say, okay, we start analyzing what are the controls we need to implement. And then out of all this data we had, identified the data, after identifying all these controls, we said, what are the appropriate controls in different stages we need to implement? So because we came up with like 50 or 60, I'm just throwing a number, I don't have it in mind. And then we said, okay, we don't need to do all the 50 or 60, we are going to do 20. And then we said, okay, which stages we are going to implement that? So we started going through that. And if you remember, I talked about the quick wins and the long-term wins. So we started going one step at a time. So what are the small wins? What are the big item wins? So that way, we are very clear with the leadership team, what is our full-time goal? So it took us like close to 2.5 years to implement what we decided and where we are now. And the next thing is visibility in the product development. This is where you take the development community with you in the journey. So I'm just going through the approach we took, and then cultural transformation, because when you talk about 100 pipelines to one pipeline, different controls, they need to know what's going on. They need to understand what is the need of that. So those things you need to do. That's how we approach. And then inner sourcing, we encourage inner sourcing because just one team can't implement all these changes. So we invited teams from different lines of business to come and help us. So this excited the development community because they're also part of this big initiative. Documentation, whatever you do, document very good. Everything you do, what the controls, document why you're doing this. If you're implementing in a certain stage, just document why you're doing, so that if new developers come, they will know what they're looking for. Then effective communication. I'll keep on telling that, keep the developers along in the journey. That's our approach we did. So some of the controls we implemented, again, this is what Capital One did. I'm not saying this is what you need to do, but your organization may have its own controls. You can do it, but you need to understand the overall vision is it's not about the controls, it's about making sure you're standardizing and you're automating all that security gaps in your organization. You're closing all those things. So we looked into the open source license violation. We looked into SAST. We looked into DAST. We looked into container vulnerabilities. We looked into infrastructure vulnerabilities. We also looked into SDLCs, as I was talking, the peer reviews. It's the same developer writing the code. Is he approving it? Is he doing the PR merge? All these things we looked into so that there is no violation on that side. So these are some of the controls we looked into. This may look very high level, but this can cover a lot of the gaps or controls you need in your organization. So I talked about the approach, and I also talked about what are some of the controls we in Chapter 1 took. And then some of the tools we explored during this process. Again, I'm not suggesting this tool or that tool. I'm not suggesting the JFrog. I'm not suggesting GitHub. I'm just giving you some hint on some of the tools Chapter 1 explored so that you can get some idea on what are the controls. Like I talked about an open source, a white source can do that. I talked about container management, a Qualys can do that. So I'm just giving you the controls and some of the tools you can start looking into and implementing. Again, these are very powerful controls, and these are powerful tools which can help you to automate that process. So these like white source, JFrog, Qualys, GitHub, X-Ray, Checkmark, these are some of the tools you can use. Again, there may be other tools which you may be interested or you may have already explored. It's absolutely okay with that. My concentration is not on the tools, but I'm just trying to take you through the journey of how you can be successful in what you're trying to implement and how you can take the development community along with your journey. So I talked about the controls Chapter 1 did, the approach we did, some of the tools we explored, and where are we now? Now we have a standardized scanning tools. We have increased the pipeline runs. If I remember right, there's close to 300,000 runs happen in our pipelines each month. So that is a lot of runs, but still we were able to decrease the build times. We didn't increase the build times by introducing so many controls, but we were able to keep it within a certain SLA. And also we were able to centralize all the policies. So if cyber says, hey, I have a policy which needs to be implemented, we are able to do that because all these production deployment is happening through a pipeline. So we were able to easily implement that and easier release decisioning. So if you have to stop a code from production bound, you can easily do it because you have centralized that, and also improved compliance and auditing. So we are here, but if you say, hey, have we done everything? There's still room for us to improve, but what the lessons we learned, what the approach we took, what the controls we explored, the tools we analyzed, all these things took us to this place where we can confidently say now, if we have to implement a control, we know how to do it. If we have to standardize something in the pipeline, we can do it. So we have crossed that canyon and we are now marching towards how can we improve our production runs. So with that, I want to take you back to the important question. The main focus of this presentation, should I move left or right? If you have noticed, I did not talk about whether we did it left or right or center. It is totally up to you. If you think you can implement on the left, it's absolutely fine. If you think you have to implement that control on the right, it's absolutely fine. So my thing here is do not be stuck with shift left or shift right or something on the terminologies, but concentrate on the controls you want to implement, but concentrate how you're going to standardize, concentrate how you're going to automate. With that decided, then you go into whether you want to shift left or not. So with that, I want to end this session saying, don't be stuck with shift left terminology. That's fancy stuff, but there's more to that. So think about the solution, think about the controls, think about the stakeholders, and think about the standardization and automation, and definitely you'll be able to do better implementation rather than getting stuck in shift left or not. So that's why I said, is shifting left the right way to securing your apps? I'm not saying anything. I'm just leaving that to you. And thank you so much for hearing me out. Again, if you have any questions, definitely you can reach me in LinkedIn. My name is Nimesh Manad. I'm one of the directors. So I'm thankful again. Thank you for listening to this, and have a good day.
Hi there. I'm really excited to be here today. I've been speaking on Agile 2 for a while now, and I'm really excited for this opportunity to bring it to the DC DevOps community. So today I'm going to focus on what Agile 2 actually is, why we came up with it, and how it's useful for DevOps. So Agile is great, and I love it. I'm an Agile coach, but it has problems. One of them is that people think that Agile is Scrum and Scrum is Agile. And Scrum is generally understood to be a process, not a philosophy. It has clear roles and duties for each role. People say to me, I need you to show me how to do the Agile process. Or, Lisa, can you just teach us how Agile works and leave out the theory? And this really kind of misses the point. A lot of people know about this, and Chris Lennon wrote this article for Medium back in July, asking if Scrum is over. So I met a senior DevOps engineer recently who told me that he's never met an Agile coach who really did any good. He said some of them are nice people and I really like talking to them, but they don't really help much. So something is clearly wrong. And when looking to hire, organizations aren't always sure that they need both DevOps people and Agile people. And whether you blame it on Agile or how people use Agile or what people think about Agile, it's not really working the way that we want it to. So if you ask the question, has Agile failed? You'll get different answers from different people. Generally, those with a vested interest or those with less experience tend to think that Agile's great and it's really useful. But developers and other tech team members like UX designers and quality engineers, people who have been harmed by rigid Agile frameworks, they will tell you privately that they hate it. The general response in the Agile community is to say that the people who don't like Agile just don't really understand it, or they will point out that the culture isn't ready for Agile. And while these may be true, they're really not that useful. And they trigger defensiveness because they imply that if you've tried Agile and it's not working for you, it's your fault, right? And so this defensiveness is among the very people that the Agilists are trying to change and to support. So it doesn't really work to go to this reason for Agile not being effective. Now, more experienced Agile coaches have a more nuanced perspective. They know just how hard it is, and they know that Agile is not the answer to everything. A mature perspective brings in other fields like organizational development, professional change management, cognitive science, instructional design, and behavioral psychology. A mature Agilist focuses on business agility. They know that the goal is not to be agile, the goal is to get good business outcomes. So with all this negativity around Agile, let's not forget that Agile brought about many useful changes in how software was being developed 20 years ago. For example, Agile got people to realize that waterfall-style projects were no good, and that it really isn't possible to design all the requirements up front and still get a good outcome. Agile argued for small teams that can work quickly rather than large teams. And they built quality in from the beginning by testing early for both bugs and integration issues. But later on, ideas in the Agile community took hold and became entrenched that were not really that helpful, and they were not really actually all that Agile either. For example, the assumption that all teams should be self-organizing. Well, what if the team isn't ready for that? What if the team lacks good leadership? Or the sidelining of written communication in favor of face-to-face conversations? This can be really problematic, for example, when major technical decisions are not documented and shared widely, or tech stacks aren't described fully enough for newcomers to figure out how to work with them. And what about all the frameworks? One problem with them is that they are not necessarily aligned with the Agile Manifesto or even ideas that are prevalent in the Agile community. And so in a way, some of them are not really Agile at all. Another problem with the frameworks is that they give people the impression that they are complete, that if you just create all the roles listed and give them specific responsibilities and tasks and follow the given process, you will be successful. The truth is that all the frameworks require tailoring. None are perfect for any and every situation and for every organization, just the way they are right out of the box. Yet people who are new to Agile assume that the frameworks are complete and they try to follow them carefully, and they're disappointed when they don't yield good results. Now, the Dark Manifesto makes fun of this by flipping the values around and making the entire thing rigid and extreme. And this came out 9 years ago in 2012. But until Agile 2, the Agile community hadn't really addressed this problem head on. Another thing is that the Agile Manifesto left stuff out. There are all these areas of knowledge and expertise that were known even back in the 1990s. For example, business data. Data was really important back in 2001, and whole companies specialized in gathering and analyzing business data, but the manifesto doesn't mention it. Now, in fairness, the original manifesto did not claim to be the be-all or the end-all to ideas about software. It was the way it was interpreted and applied or misapplied that got the Agile community into trouble. Today, data is even more important than ever. It's arguably more important than code, and methodologies that claim to be Agile also say nothing about data, with one exception, feature-driven development. But I will ask you this: how many people have heard that the data their teams push to the data lake is unusable for machine learning? It's because no one is telling the teams that when they use Scrum, they also need to figure out modeling techniques or domain-driven design, and that maintaining enterprise data models is essential if you want to leverage your data as an asset for business intelligence. Now, for DevOps to work, as you know, you need to apply it to the entire value stream, not just to the dev teams. And this is where business agility comes in. It's essential for people in different parts of the value stream to be able to have meaningful conversations. And they can only do that if they understand a little bit about each other's domain. Not everyone can be an expert in everything, but people do need to understand each other's areas. And this is why one core Agile 2 principle is that business people need to understand how their technology is built and delivered. DevOps was first conceived by Agilists. Now, though, DevOps feels like it's strictly a technical practice, with companies hiring DevOps experts and creating specialized DevOps teams. And DevOps, as it's practiced today, is more about workflow, lean techniques for software development, and testing and operations. And the challenge with Agile, which should be helping and supporting DevOps, these challenges end up holding DevOps back. The Agile community focuses on scaling Agile, which is great, using processes like Scrum or adapting Agile into models like SAFe. But DevOps also allows you to scale Agile. And so DevOps started to get traction all on its own, and in some cases, bypassing Agile. I don't really think DevOps is ready to replace Agile. You know, the original idea of DevOps was people-oriented to combine development and operations. And Nicole Forsgren in her book Accelerate shows that adopting DevOps practices is correlated with higher morale and good leadership. The reality of DevOps is different than its original articulation. And I don't think DevOps can do completely without Agile for a couple of reasons. While DevOps provides many of the missing technical pieces and elements of Agile, the other reason it can't replace Agile is that DevOps does not include theories of human behavior, and Agile 2 does. It focuses on the culture of the organization. How are its leaders? How are people expected to behave? Now, before I dive into explaining some of the Agile 2 values and principles, let me make a clear distinction between classic Agile as it's practiced in general in the Agile community and Agile 2. In classic Agile, everything's about the team. In Agile 2, the focus is on the product and on the ecosystem of the organization, especially the individuals that make up the ecosystem. Classic Agile pushes for self-organized autonomous teams. Agile 2 says that first we have to make sure we have the right kinds of leadership. We've all probably seen examples of the rigidity that has set into the Agile community around practices and methods. Agile 2 is much more balanced and pays more attention to unique circumstances. Classic Agile doesn't really address tech straight on. Instead, it focuses on process and methods. And Agile 2 is firmly rooted in DevOps. And finally, many equate Agile with Scrum, as I said before. With Agile 2, the focus is on making sure that the right things are getting done quickly. Now, the Agile 2 value statements have a both and construction. And that's intentional to avoid the idea that one concept is good and the other concept is bad, or that we value one over the other. We intentionally chose ideas that are kind of opposites because Agile 2 favors a balance between them. So for example, the first one, thoughtfulness and prescription. This means, think about the context. Understand things before choosing to act. It's okay to help inexperienced people get going by being prescriptive. They don't need to know and understand everything at first in order to get started, but they will be supported best with thoughtful guidance. Outcomes and outputs. We constantly hear that it's all about good business outcomes or other kinds of desired outcomes. And it is. But you don't get outcomes without output. So both matter. It's not wrong to measure outputs, so long as you know that those are the outputs that are leading to the outcomes you want. In the Agile space, it's all about teams. But with Agile 2, individuals are also important. That's why we say individuals and teams. After all, teams are made up of individual humans. What people need, their working style, their communication preferences, their growth, their career development, these are all really important. And team spirit matters too. Neither is more important than the other. Business understanding and technical understanding. To succeed today, technology people need to understand the business in order to do good work. And business leaders need to learn about the technology if they hope to get the best from their tech people and achieve their business goals. Individual empowerment and good leadership. We hear a lot about autonomous teams and self-organized teams, and these are really important ideas because people need to take chances and they need to try out their new ideas. They need to learn from their experiments and be innovative. At the same time, leadership is essential, and leaders need to be mindful of how much freedom their people can reasonably handle. Too much autonomy before a person or a team is ready for it can backfire very badly. Adaptability and planning. Things change so quickly these days that we're all forced to be adaptable, whether we like it or not. But that doesn't mean we should throw away our plans or stop planning. Planning is important because people need to think through what they intend to accomplish and how they will do it, and think about all the possibilities so they can prepare. It's really important to do the planning, and it's important to be adaptable when you're in the thick of it. You have to be capable of throwing away your plans and doing something different because the circumstances make that absolutely necessary. That doesn't mean that your planning was worthless. It helped you prepare, and actually, planning can help you to be more adaptable in the moment. Next, I'm going to talk about the Agile 2 principles. Now, there's a lot of principles. There's 43 of them. But even so, Agile 2 does not claim to be the last word. And it does not claim to be complete. It's not a framework. It's just a set of ideas, a set of guiding principles to help you think about what you're doing. So we've gathered these 43 principles into 8 different categories. We're going to take a look at these category by category. And there's several principles in each category. So in some cases, I've highlighted in yellow the ones that I want to focus on today. They're all really important, and they're listed here. And you're going to get a copy of these slides so you can go back and take a look at them later if you'd like. Now, product design is really important, and a focus on this is often missing as a part of the discussion during an Agile transformation. The one in yellow, I think, is really super important. Everyone working on things that impact customers should feel connected to those customers. They need to be aware of their pain if things don't turn out well. And this attitude needs to be baked right into the DNA of the organizations, because it really is the lifeblood of the reason for the organization to exist at all. And DevOps is about being accountable. It's about working collaboratively to keep the pipeline green, to deploy quickly and seamlessly with minimal disruption to the end user. So really, I think DevOps is at its essence about making sure that our customers are happy and that we do feel accountable for errors and mistakes, and we try to prevent them as much as we can. And DevOps is a great way to do that. Now, data is sometimes an afterthought, and it's not really directly addressed by most of the Agile frameworks or methods. And Agile 2 thinks that gathering good data is essential to success. And while perhaps some people think that DevOps and data are two totally separate things, it's wise for DevOps practitioners to be aware of the information model that the organization uses and to ensure that it works well and achieves its goals. Now, Agile 2 has a lot of principles on leadership. This is one of the biggest areas that we focus on. And the most important of these to me is that the leadership model that an organization has will determine everything else that happens in the organization. It can be no other way. Leaders are role models. People will imitate their behavior. Leaders are like parents. They must display the values and behavior they ask of others. They can't be in a position of saying, do as I say, not as I do, because it won't work. People are smart. They see through this really quickly, and they imitate what they see and they ignore what they hear. And Nicole Forsgren writes that DevOps is correlated with good leadership, as I said earlier. And I would argue that on the flip side, poor leadership will impede DevOps. So even if you think DevOps is mainly a technical domain, I think it's important for you to also consider what is going on regarding the leadership model that you have in your organization and the leadership that is available to your teams. Intentional, thoughtful leadership is really important. For example, teams need direction. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a team of individual contributors or a management team. A team is a team, and they all need leadership. And this is what we mean when we say that leadership models scale. Now, before I go further, I would like to make a crucial point. There is no one perfect form of leadership. An organization really needs many different kinds of leadership. So Agile 2 suggests that a team often needs more than one leader, each of a different kind. And Agile 2 does not claim to be the experts on leadership. There's a whole discipline with PhDs who teach it and explain everything about it. Agile 2 just emphasizes how important intentional leadership is to success. Agile 2 tries to bring leadership back into a central role in Agile. Now, here's a bunch of different kinds of leadership. These are very different leadership traits, and you seldom see them in the same person, but they're all needed at different times and in different circumstances. And they do not need to come from a person with positional authority or an official role. It can come from anyone on the team. Now, the Agile community shares a collective view that leaders will emerge. And the question is, do the leaders who emerge have the skills or leadership qualities that are needed? The evidence from leadership research shows that while leaders do emerge when people are left to their own devices, those leaders don't necessarily have the right traits. They might be very strong-willed. They might be the people who are the most extroverted, but they may not serve the group in its ultimate purpose. Agile 2 supports the concept of emergent leadership and the idea of intentional leadership approaches to ensure that all the teams have all the kinds of leadership that they need. Now, one of Agile 2's principles is that good leaders are open. And here we're talking about those with positional authority. That means that leaders need to listen before they give orders. Just because they have authority doesn't mean they should use it, right? In fact, good leaders will only use their authority sparingly. And people need to have agency over how they do their work so that they can unleash their creativity. But when issues arise that transcend the team, a good leader knows how to deal with them. A good leader will take into account issues that are outside the team along with issues that are internal to the team. Okay, frameworks. We talked a little bit about this earlier. The core idea of Agile 2 regarding frameworks is that they should all be tailored for the situation. Implementing frameworks without doing this is much less likely to yield good results. Agile 2 ideas around workflow align closely with Lean. Things that slow us down do us great harm. We need to be alert at all times for causes for delay and address them. And after all, isn't this really the heart of DevOps? To be able to release software regularly and smoothly? DevOps, when done effectively, can really speed things up in a good way. Okay, this is one of my favorites, technical and business fluency. Agile 2 emphasizes that all organizations these days have a technical element, and this tech is central to the organization's success. Business leaders need to understand how their technical products and services are built and delivered in order for the organization to be successful. Now, this may seem self-evident and obvious to you, but sometimes business leaders outsource managing their tech, while leaders continue to make decisions and devise strategies that completely contradict the things needed for the tech to be successful. I've heard from DevOps engineers who get frustrated because a company hires them to install DevOps and then doesn't want to change anything they're currently doing. They just want the engineer to somehow magically install DevOps and make everything go fast. Business leaders who take the time to get a sense of what DevOps really means are far more likely to be open to the changes necessary for it to work well. In addition, technical leaders need to understand the business. Often, technical leaders are considered by the organization to not really need to know too much about the business because their job is taking care of the tech. And Agile 2 says that actually technical leaders really do need to understand what's going on with the business, and especially the leaders at a fairly deep level so that they can make the right technical decisions that take into account the business trade-offs and the impacts of the decisions that they're making. So many of the Agile 2 ideas around transformation are common sense. That is, if you are an engineer, and especially if you're an expert in DevOps. Yet they bear repeating and keeping in mind because it's so easy to lose sight of the conditions needed for bringing about change in the organization. For example, a transformation is really about lots of people in an organization being willing to learn. This doesn't happen through a step-by-step process change. As a training expert, I can tell you it doesn't happen through training alone. It's about a deeper change in the heart, where people really learn to see things differently and be open to new ideas. And this, in turn, requires things like running small experiments to see how things turn out, or ensuring that the top level of leadership is on board with the changes, and that when people do run these small experiments, because a lot of them won't work out and they fail, but they're seen as learning opportunities. They're seen as ways to advance the organization and not as failures. Finally, Agile 2 focuses on people as individuals. The biggest complaint I hear is that there are too many meetings. People associate Agile with having way too many meetings. And I've even heard people say that they have to work nights and weekends just to get their real work done because their days are full of meetings. This is crazy. People require sufficient focus time so that they can actually get their work done. The Agile 2 principles around people also focus more on the individual than the team. We do value the team and we value team output, but at the end of the day, teams are made up of individuals, and those people need to be supported fully in order for the team to be effective. I'd like to end by making the case for Agile 2 from the perspective of a DevOps practitioner. Many of you may have concluded that Agile is irrelevant for the work that you do. And like my friend I mentioned before, you don't have much use for Agile coaches and Agilists in general. But what about the culture problem? How are you going to tackle that? I hear from my DevOps practitioner friends that the biggest impediment to successful DevOps is culture. And culture can't be fixed with a technical solution. It needs people who know about psychology and theories of organizational development and change management and how to assess culture, how to identify what's actually going on so that you can come up with a plan for addressing the cultural impediments that are preventing you from having success. And this is why DevOps needs Agile 2. Because Agile 2 can help you to overcome the cultural obstacles in the way of your success. So I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about Agile 2. I'm going to share some resources if you want to learn more. A group of us wrote a book called Agile 2, The Next Iteration of Agile, which is available on Amazon. You can also read all about the values and principles of Agile 2 on the agile2.net website. There were 15 people involved in this effort over a period of 8 months. And we were from all over the world, and we had lots of conversations and debates about all of these different ideas to come up with the final set of values and principles. And we all stand behind all the values and principles. There's also an Agile 2 group on LinkedIn, and it talks about all of these ideas. And it's you do need to request to join the group, but we accept everyone who requests to join. And people there debate different ideas related to Agile 2, how they can use Agile 2 in their organizations, what does it actually mean? And it's a really wonderful group of individuals. So I encourage you to consider joining that if you want to learn more. Also, I'd love it if you'd stay in touch. Here's my email. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter. Although I don't have very many Twitter followers, I do love chatting with people. So reach out to me anytime. I'm happy to answer your questions and continue the conversation. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.